When my partner told me, "You couldn't survive a month without me paying for everything," I simply smiled and said, "Then watch me thrive." That same afternoon, I packed my things and moved into the penthouse he didn't know I'd been paying for all along. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The words came out of his mouth so casually, like he was commenting on the weather or discussing what to order for dinner. We were standing in the kitchen of our apartment in downtown Seattle, the one with the view of Elliott Bay that he loved to show off to his friends. It was a Tuesday evening in late September, and I had just mentioned wanting to take a weekend trip to visit my sister in Portland. "With what money?" Derek had asked, not even looking up from his phone. He was scrolling through something, probably his social media feed, his attention only half on our conversation. "You know we're tight this month. I've got that payment coming up for the boat." The boat? The 42-foot sailing yacht docked at the marina that he treated like his most prized possession. The one he took his clients out on for networking events. The one he bought 18 months ago after closing what he called the biggest deal of his career. I had been cutting vegetables for a stir-fry, the knife moving in steady rhythm against the cutting board. I set it down carefully, turned to face him and said nothing. Just waited. He finally glanced up, registered my expression, and sighed with the kind of exasperation usually reserved for children who don't understand basic concepts. "Elena, come on. Don't look at me like that. You know I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just being realistic. Your freelance income is unpredictable. We can't plan trips around money that might or might not materialize." "My freelance income?" I repeated, keeping my voice level. "Yeah, your graphic design stuff. Look, it's great that you have hobbies that bring in a little extra cash, but we both know I'm carrying the real financial weight here. The rent, the utilities, the car payments, the insurance. All of it." He said it with such confidence, such absolute certainty, that for a moment I almost questioned my own reality. Almost wondered if I had imagined the last 4 years of my life. Almost believed his version of our story where he was the successful commercial real estate broker supporting his artistically inclined girlfriend, who dabbled in design work from their apartment. "You think you're carrying the financial weight," I said. It wasn't a question. "I know I am." He stood up from the kitchen table, walked to the refrigerator, pulled out a beer. "And that's fine, Elena. I'm not complaining. I make good money. I can support both of us comfortably. But you need to be realistic about what that means. It means sometimes we can't just take spontaneous trips because you feel like seeing your sister. It means we make decisions together based on what I'm bringing in." The condensation from his beer bottle dripped onto the granite countertop. I watched the small puddle form, watched him take a long drink, watched him look at me with that expression I'd seen 1,000 times over the past 4 years. The expression that said he was being patient with me, understanding, generous, even in tolerating my limited grasp of financial reality. "What if I told you," I said slowly, "that my income isn't unpredictable? What if I told you it's actually very consistent?" He laughed. Not cruelly but dismissively. The kind of laugh that says the conversation has already ended in his mind, and we're just going through the motions until I accept the obvious truth. "Elena, you work from home in your pajamas most days. You don't have clients coming to an office. You don't have a boss or a salary or benefits. It's freelance work. By definition, it's unpredictable." "I have clients," I said. "Lots of them, actually." "I'm sure you do. And that's great. But we're talking about real money here. The kind of money that pays for a 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Seattle, that covers a car payment on a BMW, that handles a boat slip at the marina. Your design work brings in what, maybe $1,000 a month? $2,000 on a good month?" He said it so confidently. $2,000 on a good month. The number hung in the air between us like smoke. I could have corrected him right then. Could have pulled out my laptop and shown him my business bank account, the one he'd never asked about, never expressed interest in, never thought to wonder about in 4 years of living together. Could have shown him the deposits that came in like clockwork, the client retainers, the project payments, the monthly revenue that hadn't dropped below 6 figures annually in the last 3 years. But I didn't. Instead, I picked up the knife, went back to cutting vegetables, and let him believe what he'd always believed. That I was Elena Rodriguez, the struggling graphic designer with artistic aspirations and limited income. That he was Derek Sullivan, the successful broker who generously supported his less financially stable girlfriend. That our relationship operated according to the script he'd written in his head, and never bothered to verify against reality. So about the Portland trip, he continued, apparently considering the matter settled. Maybe in a few months when things ease up financially. Or maybe your sister could come here instead. Wouldn't that be easier? Sure, I said. That would be easier. He smiled, relieved that I was being reasonable, and went back to his phone. The conversation was over. He'd asserted his financial dominance, I'd accepted it, and our relationship could continue operating in the comfortable hierarchy he'd established. Except something had shifted in that moment. Something fundamental and irreversible. For 4 years I had let Derek believe he was supporting me. I had let him introduce me at his work events as my girlfriend Elena, who does graphic design. I had let him pay for dinners and tell his friends he was taking care of me. I had let him make decisions about our life together based on the assumption that his income mattered and mine didn't. I had told myself I was being kind, that it didn't matter who paid for what as long as we were happy, that Derek's ego was fragile in ways he'd never admit, and letting him feel like the provider was a small price to pay for peace in our relationship. But standing in that kitchen, listening to him casually dismiss my work and my financial autonomy, I realized I hadn't been kind. I'd been dishonest. And that dishonesty had allowed Derek to construct a version of reality so divorced from the truth that he could tell me, with complete sincerity, that I couldn't survive without his financial support. The man didn't even know I owned the penthouse we were standing in. Let me back up. Let me tell you how we got here, because the story doesn't start with Derek's dismissive comment in the kitchen. It starts 4 years earlier in a coffee shop in Capitol Hill, back when I actually did believe my income was unpredictable and I was barely scraping by. I was 28 years old, working as a junior designer at a small branding agency that paid me $42,000 a year to create logos for startups that usually folded within 18 months. I was good at my work, but the agency was stagnant, the clients were uninspiring, and I spent most of my days wondering if I'd made a mistake choosing design as a career. I met Derek on a Saturday afternoon in October. I was sitting at a corner table with my laptop, working on a freelance project I picked up to supplement my meager agency salary. He was there with a group of friends, loud and confident, telling stories that made everyone around him laugh. He noticed me noticing him, came over when his friends left, asked what I was working on. I showed him the logo design I was developing for a tech startup. He looked at it with genuine interest, asked smart questions about the design choices, seemed impressed by the work. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about his job in commercial real estate, about the properties he was brokering, about his ambitions to build his own firm someday. He was charismatic and ambitious and seemed fascinated by my work in a way my agency colleagues never were. He asked for my number. We went to dinner 3 days later. Within a month, we were dating seriously. Within 6 months, he'd asked me to move in with him. I found this great place, he'd said. 2 bedrooms, amazing view, perfect location. It's a little pricey, but I can swing it. And you'd have space for a home office. You could finally quit that agency job and do your design work full-time. I had been thinking about going freelance for months, but was terrified of losing the security of a steady paycheck. Derek's offer felt like a lifeline, a way to take the leap without drowning financially. He believed in me, he said. He wanted to support my dreams. So I quit my agency job, moved into Derek's apartment, and started building my freelance design business. Except the apartment wasn't Derek's. It was mine. He didn't know this because I'd never told him. When he'd shown me the listing and said he could swing it, I hadn't corrected him. I just nodded and agreed it was perfect and let him believe he was making it happen. The truth was more complicated. The truth was that 3 months before meeting Derek, I'd started taking on freelance clients through a connection my college roommate had made. Her brother worked at a venture capital firm in San Francisco, and he'd introduced me to several portfolio companies that needed branding work. The projects were bigger and paid significantly better than anything I'd done at the agency. Within 2 months, I was making more from freelance work than from my day job. Within 4 months, I'd saved enough for a down payment on a small condo. But then I met Derek and he'd seemed so excited about finding us a place to live together. So proud to be able to offer me the financial stability to quit my agency job. And I'd thought, what's the harm in letting him believe he's making this happen? What's the harm in letting him feel like the provider? So when he showed me the apartment listing, I'd already seen it. I'd already contacted the landlord. I'd already submitted an application and been approved based on my freelance income and credit score. The apartment was mine. The lease would be in my name. But Derek didn't need to know that. I let him think he'd found it, let him think he was renting it, let him think he was generously providing me with space to build my business. And for the first year it worked. Derek felt successful and generous. I had the freedom to build my client base without worrying about rent. We were happy. My freelance business grew faster than I'd anticipated. The venture capital network my college roommate's brother had connected me with turned out to be incredibly lucrative. These startups had funding and they valued good design. They understood that branding could make or break their market positioning. Word spread quickly in that ecosystem. One satisfied client would refer me to 3 others. Within a year of going full-time freelance, I was turning down projects because I didn't have capacity. Within 18 months, I'd hired 2 contractors to help with overflow work. Within 2 years, I'd formally established myself as an LLC with a portfolio of retained clients paying monthly fees for ongoing design support. My income had grown from the $42,000 agency salary to 6 figures annually. Then low 6 figures became mid 6 figures. By year 3, I was approaching $200,000 in annual revenue with profit margins that made my accountant very happy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And through all of this growth, Derek continued to believe I was making maybe $2,000 a month on a good month. He continued to introduce me as his girlfriend who did freelance design work. He continued to pay for dinners and tell his friends he was supporting me while I built my little business. I told myself I let him believe this because it made him happy, because his ego needed it, because our relationship was smoother when he felt like the successful one. But standing in that kitchen, listening to him tell me I couldn't afford a weekend trip to see my sister, I realized the real reason I'd hidden my success. I was afraid. Afraid of how Derek would react to being wrong about something so fundamental. Afraid of disrupting the relationship dynamic we'd established. Afraid that if Derek knew the truth about my income, about my financial independence, about the fact that I owned the apartment we lived in, he would feel diminished. And I'd been right to be afraid, because I could see exactly how this conversation would go if I told him the truth right now. He would be shocked, then defensive, then angry. He would accuse me of lying to him for years. He would question why I'd hidden this. He would feel humiliated in front of his friends who all believed he was supporting me. The Derek I knew would not handle this revelation well. He would not celebrate my success or feel proud of what I'd built. He would feel threatened and emasculated and betrayed. So I had 2 choices. I could continue letting him believe his fiction, continue playing the role of the girlfriend who needed his financial support, continue making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. Or I could stop. I finished cutting the vegetables, turned on the stove, started cooking dinner. Derek sat at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone, occasionally commenting on something he saw, completely unaware that I just made a decision that would change everything between us. After dinner, after he'd gone to his weekly basketball game with his friends, I sat down at my laptop and started making plans. I opened a new document and titled it simply Exit Strategy. First, I needed to understand exactly what Derek believed about our financial situation versus what was actually true. I made 2 columns. In one column, I listed what Derek thought. In the other, I listed reality. Derek thought he was paying rent on our apartment. Reality was that I owned it. I'd purchased the condo 3.5 years ago with a 20% down payment I'd saved from my early freelance work. The mortgage was in my name. The deed was in my name. Derek had never seen a lease because I'd told him the landlord was old-fashioned and preferred verbal agreements. Derek thought he was paying utilities. Reality was that the utilities were automatically deducted from my business account and had been since we moved in. Derek transferred me money each month for his half of bills. I'd been depositing those transfers into a separate savings account and never touching them. Derek thought he'd bought the furniture in our apartment. Reality was that I'd purchased most of it before he moved in. The leather couch he loved, the dining table he'd picked out, the king bed frame he'd assembled, all of it had been purchased with my money and merely approved by him. Derek thought his BMW was his. Reality was more complicated. He'd bought it 2 years ago with a loan that he'd struggled to keep up with. Last year, when he'd fallen behind on payments during a slow period at work, I'd paid off the loan in full. $28,000, transferred directly to the lender. I told Derek the lender had made an error in his favor, that they'd somehow credited his account. He believed it because he wanted to believe it. Derek thought his boat was his greatest achievement. Reality was that I'd co-signed the loan because his credit score alone wasn't sufficient. My income and credit rating had made the loan possible. My name was on the paperwork. He'd never looked at the documents closely enough to notice. Column by column, the gulf between Derek's perception and reality became staggering. For 4 years, I had been the primary financial engine of our relationship, while allowing him to believe he was supporting me. Every major purchase, every financial decision, every moment of stability had been built on my income and my credit, but I'd carefully orchestrated things so Derek never had to confront that truth. Why? Because I'd loved him. Because I thought protecting his ego was more important than being honest. Because I believed that a relationship required one person to be the successful one and one person to be the supportive one. And I'd chosen to play the supportive role even though it wasn't true. But his comment in the kitchen had crystallized something I'd been trying to ignore for months. Derek didn't just believe he was supporting me financially. He believed I was incapable of supporting myself. He believed I needed him. He believed my success was small and insignificant and that without his generosity, I would struggle to survive. That belief wasn't loving. It wasn't protective. It was condescending. And I was done enabling it. I spent 3 hours that night documenting everything. Bank statements showing the mortgage payments on the condo, utility bills in my name, purchase receipts for furniture and electronics, the BMW loan payoff confirmation, the boat loan documents with my signature, tax returns showing my business income. Then I opened a new browser tab and started searching for moving companies. Because the condo we lived in, the one Derek thought he was renting, wasn't actually where I wanted to be anymore. It had served its purpose when I bought it 4 years ago as a starter property in an up-and-coming neighborhood. But over the past year I'd been looking at upgrading. 6 months ago, I'd purchased a penthouse in a high-rise building overlooking Puget Sound. 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, a terrace with panoramic views of the water and the mountains. 2,000 square feet of luxury living space in one of Seattle's most prestigious buildings. I'd furnished it completely, hired an interior designer, created a home office with custom built-ins and professional lighting for client video calls, set up the master bedroom with a king bed that cost more than Derek's monthly salary, stocked the kitchen with high-end appliances and the bathrooms with luxury fixtures. The penthouse was everything I dreamed of when I started my business 4 years ago. It represented success on my own terms, space designed exactly to my preferences, a home that reflected who I actually was rather than who Derek believed me to be. And I'd done it all without mentioning it to Derek. Not once in 6 months of purchasing and furnishing and preparing this space had I told him it existed. I'd used the excuse of visiting my sister in Portland or attending design conferences to spend weekends there, slowly moving my most important possessions, creating a sanctuary that was entirely mine. I told myself I was keeping it secret because I wasn't sure about our relationship anymore. Because I needed a backup plan. Because I wanted a space that was completely mine without any of Derek's input or presence. All of that was true. But I'd also kept it secret for the same reason I'd hidden my income and my ownership of our current condo. Because I was afraid of how Derek would react to evidence of my financial independence. Afraid he would feel diminished. Afraid the truth would destroy what we had. Except now, sitting at my laptop at midnight while Derek slept in our bedroom, I realized that what we had was already destroyed. It had been destroyed the moment Derek had looked at me and said I couldn't survive without his financial support. It had been destroyed years ago, actually the first time I'd let him believe a fiction instead of telling him the truth. You can't build a real relationship on false premises. You can't love someone while hiding fundamental truths about who you are. And you can't respect someone who needs you to be less than you are in order to feel good about themselves. I had been lying to Derek for 4 years. But Derek had been lying to himself for just as long. constructing a narrative about our relationship that required me to be dependent and limited and grateful for his generosity. The lies had fed each other, creating a reality that satisfied neither of us because it wasn't actually real. It was time to stop lying. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to show Derek exactly who I was and what I was capable of, and let him deal with the consequences of having dramatically underestimated me for 4 years. I closed my laptop and went to bed. Derek was snoring softly, one arm thrown over his eyes, completely at peace in his version of reality where he was the successful provider, and I was the dependent girlfriend who should be grateful for his support. By the end of the week, that reality would shatter completely, and I would finally, after 4 years of hiding, step fully into the truth of who I was and what I'd built. The only question was whether Derek could handle it. But honestly, at that moment, I wasn't sure I cared anymore. The morning after Derek's kitchen declaration, I woke at 5:30, a full hour before my alarm. The apartment was still dark, Seattle's autumn dawn not yet breaking through the clouds that perpetually hovered over the city. Derek slept beside me, his breathing deep and even, completely undisturbed by the seismic shift that had occurred in my mind the night before. I lay there for several minutes, watching the ceiling fan rotate slowly, thinking about the conversation that would need to happen, and the life that would need to be dismantled. 4 years of carefully constructed fiction. 4 years of allowing someone to believe a version of me that bore only superficial resemblance to who I actually was. 4 years of making myself smaller, quieter, less successful, less capable, less everything so that Derek could feel like the accomplished partner in our relationship. The weight of those years pressed down on me in the pre-dawn darkness. Not with regret exactly, but with a kind of exhausted recognition. I had done this to myself. Derek had constructed his narrative about our relationship, yes, but I had provided all the materials. Every time I downplayed a major client win, every time I'd let him pay for dinner when I had more money in my account than he'd see in 6 months, every time I'd nodded along when he'd made decisions about our life based on his income alone, I had been an active participant in the fiction. But participation could end. Fiction could be replaced with fact. And the version of myself I'd been performing for Derek's benefit could be retired permanently. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake him, and went to the kitchen. I made coffee in the French press I'd bought from a boutique shop in Pike Place Market, the one Derek had admired but said was too expensive when I could just use the standard drip coffee maker. I'd bought it anyway and told him I'd found it on sale. Another small lie in a relationship built on strategic omissions. The coffee was excellent, dark and rich, exactly the way I liked it. I took my cup to the living room window and stood looking out at the city beginning to wake up. Lights flickering on in neighboring buildings. Early morning joggers appearing on the streets below. The perpetual motion of a city that never fully slept. My phone was on the coffee table where I'd left it the night before. I picked it up and opened my messages, scrolling to a conversation I'd been avoiding for weeks. My best friend Lucia had been asking pointed questions about Derek lately, expressing concern about things she'd noticed when we all went out together. The way he spoke over me in conversations. The way he made decisions without consulting me. The way he introduced me to his colleagues as if my work was a charming hobby rather than a legitimate career. I typed out a message. "You were right about Derek. I'm handling it. Can we meet for coffee this weekend? I need to talk through some decisions." Her response came back within seconds, despite the early hour. Lucia was a morning person, probably already at the gym or preparing for her shift at the hospital where she worked as an emergency room physician. Finally, yes, Saturday morning. My place. I'll have the good coffee ready and approximately zero judgment about whatever you're about to tell me. I smiled at the screen. Lucia had known me since college, had watched me build my business from those first nervous freelance projects, had celebrated every major client win even when I couldn't tell Derek about them. She was one of the few people who knew the truth about my income and my ownership of the condo, and she'd been increasingly vocal about her opinion that hiding those things from Derek was unsustainable. "It's not healthy," she'd said the last time we discussed it, about 2 months ago over drinks at a wine bar in Belltown. "You're building resentment. He's building this false sense of superiority. Eventually it's going to explode, and it's going to be ugly when it does." She'd been right, of course. Lucia was usually right about relationship dynamics, probably because she spent her days in the emergency room seeing the aftermath of all the ways humans could damage each other, physically and emotionally. She had no patience for relationship patterns that were clearly destructive, even when they looked functional on the surface. I heard movement from the bedroom. Derek was awake. I set down my phone and picked up my coffee, taking a long sip, preparing myself for the performance I was about to deliver. Because I wasn't ready to have the full confrontation yet. I needed time to arrange things, to prepare the reveal, to set the stage for the moment when Derek would finally understand how profoundly he'd misunderstood our entire relationship. So for now, I would continue playing the role he expected. The girlfriend who accepted his financial assessments without argument. The woman who deferred to his judgment about what we could and couldn't afford. The partner who occupied the background of his life rather than the center of her own. Derek emerged from the bedroom in his running clothes, already checking his phone. He ran every morning, a 5-mile loop through downtown that he claimed cleared his head before work. "You're up early," he said, not quite a question. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, which was true enough. "Big project deadline coming up." He nodded, accepting this explanation without curiosity about what project or what deadline or why it would cause me to lose sleep. In 4 years, Derek had never asked detailed questions about my work. He knew I did graphic design stuff for tech companies, and that was the extent of his interest. He'd never asked to see my portfolio, never inquired about my creative process, never wondered about the specifics of running a design business. "I'm going to run," he said, filling a water bottle at the sink. "Then I've got that breakfast meeting with the team from the Vancouver property. Probably won't be home until late. We're doing site visits all day." "Okay," I said. "Have a good run." He left without kissing me goodbye, already absorbed in whatever podcast he was queuing up on his phone. The door closed behind him and I listened to his footsteps receding down the hallway outside our unit, down the stairs toward the street. The moment he was gone, I moved into action. I had approximately 45 minutes before he would return, sweaty and energized, ready to shower and get dressed for his breakfast meeting. 45 minutes to begin the practical work of extracting myself from the life we'd built together. I went to the bedroom and opened the closet we shared. My clothes took up the left side, his the right, our lives divided neatly down the middle. I began pulling items off hangers, not everything, just the pieces that mattered most. The blazers I wore for client video calls. The dresses I saved for in-person meetings. The shoes that made me feel powerful and professional. I folded them carefully and placed them in a large duffel bag I retrieved from the hall closet. Then I moved to my dresser, pulling out essentials. Not enough that Derek would notice immediately, but enough that I would have what I needed at the Penthouse. Enough that I could begin the process of relocating my life from this condo to the space I'd created for myself across town. My laptop and work files were next. I packed my external hard drives, my tablet, the notebooks where I sketched design concepts and jotted down ideas during client calls. The tools of my actual profession, the evidence of the work Derek had so casually dismissed as bringing in maybe $2,000 on a good month. I worked quickly and methodically, running through a mental checklist I'd been developing since last night. Documents from the file cabinet in the office nook. Jewelry from the box on my dresser. The framed photo of my grandmother that sat on the nightstand. The favorite coffee mug Derek had never understood I was attached to. Small things, meaningful things, pieces of my life that belonged to me rather than to us. By the time I heard Derek's key in the lock, I had 3 bags packed and hidden in the back of the bedroom closet. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop open, looking exactly like I had been when he left, working on a design project as if nothing had changed. "Good run," I asked as he came in, not looking up from my screen. "Great," he said, breathing hard, his face flushed from exertion. "Hit a new personal record on the last mile. I'm going to shower." He disappeared into the bathroom and I heard the water start. I saved my work, closed my laptop and sat there thinking about timing. I needed to move carefully, deliberately, without tipping my hand too early. Derek was not a stupid man, despite his blindness about our financial reality. If I started acting strangely or asking unexpected questions, he would notice. If I suddenly changed my behavior or challenged his assumptions, he would become defensive and suspicious. Better to maintain the status quo for a few more days while I arranged everything that needed arranging. Better to let him continue believing his version of our reality, while I quietly dismantled it from the inside. Better to wait until I could deliver the truth all at once, in a context where the evidence was undeniable and the reveal was complete. When Derek emerged from the shower, dressed in one of his expensive suits, I was in the kitchen making breakfast. Eggs and toast, simple and domestic, the kind of scene that probably confirmed his view of our relationship. Him getting ready for an important day of business. Me making breakfast in the home he believed he provided. "You're the best," he said, kissing the top of my head as he grabbed the plate I offered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The irony of that statement, less than 24 hours after he'd told me I couldn't survive without him, was almost too perfect. I smiled and said nothing, watching him eat quickly while checking his phone, already mentally at his breakfast meeting, already absorbed in his important work. He left at 7:45, promising to text me later about dinner plans. I watched from the window as his BMW, the one I'd secretly paid off, pulled out of the parking space below and merged into morning traffic. Then I picked up my phone and made the first of several calls I needed to make. "Northwest Moving and Storage," a cheerful voice answered. "How can I help you today?" "I need to schedule a move," I said. "Full apartment contents. I need it done next Wednesday midday while my partner is at work." The woman on the other end didn't ask questions about why I needed to move while my partner was absent. She'd probably handled dozens of situations like this, women extracting themselves from relationships or living situations, timing their departures for moments of minimal conflict. She simply took down the details, confirmed the date and time, quoted me a price that made me glad I'd built a successful business. "We'll have a 3-person crew there at noon on Wednesday," she confirmed. "Everything will be packed, loaded, and transported to your new address by 5 p.m. We're very discreet." "Thank you," I said and meant it. Next I called my lawyer, Catherine Chan, the attorney who'd handled the purchase of both the condo and the penthouse. She'd also set up my LLC and reviewed my business contracts. She knew the full scope of my financial situation and had expressed private concern about the fact that Derek remained unaware of it. "Elena," she said when her assistant connected us, "this is unexpected. What's going on?" "I'm leaving Derek," I said, the words feeling both enormous and simple. "I need to understand my legal position and my obligations. The condo is in my name. Can he make any claim to it?" Catherine was quiet for a moment, likely pulling up my files on her computer. "No," she said finally. "You purchased it before you moved in together. He's never been on the deed or the mortgage. It's your separate property. He has no legal claim to it." "What about the fact that he's been living there and believes he's been paying rent? Have you been depositing his rent payments into a separate account?" "Yes. I haven't touched them. They're sitting in a savings account." "Then you're fine. You can return that money to him if you want to be generous, but legally you're not required to. He's been living in your property. That's the reality, regardless of what he believed about the arrangement." I felt tension I didn't know I'd been holding release from my shoulders. "And the business? My income? Can he claim any of that?" "You're not married. You built the business yourself. Your income is your own. Washington is a community property state, but that only applies to married couples. As an unmarried couple, your assets remain separate unless you've explicitly combined them or put his name on accounts." "I haven't," I said. "Everything is in my name alone." "Then you're in a strong position. My advice is to move out cleanly, return any money he might have a legitimate claim to, and make a clear break. Don't let it drag out. Don't let him negotiate or make promises about changing. You've already made your decision. Execute it and move forward." Catherine's directness was one of the things I valued about her. She didn't waste time on emotional processing or questioning my motivations. She gave me the legal facts and let me make my own choices about what to do with them. "One more thing," I said. "He co-signed on his boat loan. My name is on that paperwork too. Do you want to remain financially connected to him through a boat loan?" "Absolutely not." "Then I'd suggest paying off the loan in full before you leave. It removes any ongoing financial entanglement and makes a clean break possible. You have the resources to do that?" "Yes," I said. "I'll handle it this week." After we hung up, I sat with my laptop and began making a list. Things that needed to happen before Wednesday. Actions that needed to be taken. Conversations that needed to occur. The practical details of dismantling a 4-year relationship and revealing truths that had been hidden for just as long. The list grew quickly. Contact the boat loan company and pay off the remaining balance. Transfer all utilities at the condo out of my name or cancel them entirely. Arrange mail forwarding to the Penthouse. Remove my name from any joint accounts or shared services. Return the money Derek had been paying me for rent, removing any possible claim he might make about financial contributions to the household. I also needed to inform a few key people about what was happening. My sister in Portland, who I'd been planning to visit when Derek had made his dismissive comment about money. My parents, who lived in Phoenix and had met Derek several times but never quite warmed to him. My business partner and assistant, who would need to know I was moving and might be dealing with some personal turmoil in the coming weeks. But most importantly, I needed to prepare for the reveal itself. The moment when Derek would arrive home from work on Wednesday to find the apartment empty, his girlfriend gone, and a letter waiting for him that would finally, after 4 years of fiction, tell him the unvarnished truth about who I was and what I'd been hiding. I opened a new document on my laptop and began to write. Dear Derek. I typed, then deleted it. Too formal. Too distant. This letter needed to be direct and clear, but not cold. I was ending a relationship and revealing uncomfortable truths, but I didn't want to be cruel about it. I just wanted to be honest. I started again. Derek, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I've moved out. This isn't impulsive and it isn't about anger. It's about truth. I wrote for an hour, deleting and revising, trying to find language that was both honest and fair. The letter grew to 3 pages, single-spaced, every sentence carefully considered. I detailed the financial realities he'd been blind to, the fact that I owned the condo, the fact that my business generated substantial income, the fact that I'd been supporting both of us in ways he'd never recognized or acknowledged. But I also wrote about why I'd hidden these things, taking responsibility for my part in the deception. I'd been afraid of threatening his ego. I'd valued relationship harmony over honesty. I'd believed that making myself smaller was an acceptable price for keeping him comfortable. Your comment yesterday about me not being able to survive without your financial support made me realize how deeply we've both been lying. I wrote. You've been lying to yourself about the nature of our relationship and my capabilities. I've been lying to you by letting you believe a fiction that was never true. We built 4 years on false premises, and I can't do it anymore. I ended the letter with logistics. The condo was mine. He would need to find a new place to live. I'd left him 60 days' worth of rent money, more than enough time to secure alternative housing. I'd paid off the boat loan so there would be no ongoing financial connection between us. His belongings would remain in the apartment untouched. He could arrange to move them whenever he was ready. I don't hate you, I wrote in the final paragraph. I just can't love someone who needs me to be less than I am. I hope you find someone who fits your narrative better than I do. I hope someday you learn to ask questions instead of making assumptions. I hope this teaches you something about really seeing the people in your life instead of projecting your expectations onto them. I saved the letter and printed it. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in an envelope with Derek's name written on the front. This envelope would sit on the kitchen counter next Wednesday when he came home to an empty apartment, the final piece of evidence in the case against the relationship we'd been pretending to have. The rest of that week passed in a strange double reality. On the surface, everything continued as normal. Derek went to work, came home, talked about his clients and his deals and his ambitions. I worked from the condo, taking client calls and creating designs, playing the role of the girlfriend who did freelance graphic work from home. But underneath that surface normalcy, I was systematically extracting myself from our shared life. Every day while Derek was at work, I packed another bag or two. Every evening I made quiet phone calls arranging logistics. Every night I refined the letter I would leave behind, making sure it said everything that needed saying without saying too much. On Tuesday I paid off Derek's boat loan. $37,000, wired directly to the lender. The customer service representative seemed surprised that I wanted to pay off the full balance, rather than just making the scheduled payment. This will close the account, she said. Are you sure you want to do that? Completely sure, I said. On Tuesday evening, Derek came home excited about a new property his firm was listing. A waterfront commercial space that could be perfect for a tech company looking to expand. He talked about it through dinner, sketching out ideas for how the space could be marketed, who the potential buyers might be, what commission he stood to make if the deal closed. I listened and nodded and asked appropriate questions, all while knowing this was one of the last conversations we would have as a couple. Tomorrow at noon, movers would arrive. By the time Derek came home from work, I would be gone. The condo would be empty except for his belongings. The relationship would be over. He didn't notice my distraction. He was too absorbed in his excitement, too focused on his own narrative about his professional success. He kissed me goodnight and fell asleep quickly, while I lay awake thinking about the life I was about to step into fully. The penthouse was ready. I'd spent the weekend there, the time I'd told Derek I was visiting my sister in Portland. I'd arranged my furniture, hung my art, set up my office exactly the way I wanted it. The space was beautiful, sophisticated, entirely mine. Walking into it felt like exhaling after holding my breath for 4 years. Tomorrow I would move into that space permanently. Tomorrow I would stop hiding. Tomorrow Derek would come home to find everything he believed about our relationship shattered by the simple, unavoidable truth. I wasn't the struggling freelancer who needed his support. I was a successful business owner who had been quietly holding our life together, while he took credit for providing stability. I wasn't dependent on him. He had been depending on me, and he'd never even known it. The revelation would be devastating for him. I knew that, but it was necessary. For both of us. He needed to understand that the woman he'd been dismissing was actually the foundation on which his comfortable life had been built. And I needed to stop allowing someone to underestimate me, just because it made them feel better about themselves. At midnight, I got out of bed one last time and walked through the condo in the darkness. This place had been my first major purchase, the physical evidence that my business was succeeding, that I was building something real. I'd been proud of it when I bought it 4 years ago. But I'd never really lived here, not fully. I'd always been performing a version of myself that fit Derek's expectations. I'd turned this space into a stage set for a play about his success rather than a home that reflected my own. Tomorrow that would end. Tomorrow I would move into a space that was entirely, unapologetically mine. A space where I didn't have to hide my success or pretend to be less capable than I was. A space where I could finally, after 4 years of strategic invisibility, be completely visible as myself. I went back to bed and fell asleep almost immediately. My decision made, my course set, my future finally beginning to look like something I'd chosen, rather than something I'd accepted to keep someone else comfortable. Wednesday morning, Derek left for work at his usual time, whistling as he grabbed his coffee and his briefcase. "See you tonight," he called over his shoulder. "We should celebrate this new listing. Maybe go to that sushi place you like?" "Sure," I said, knowing I wouldn't be there when he got home. "That sounds great." The door closed behind him. I watched from the window as his BMW pulled away. Then I picked up my phone and called the moving company. "We're ready whenever you are," I said. "We'll be there in 30 minutes," the coordinator confirmed. I looked around the condo one last time. At the furniture Derek thought he'd bought. At the space he thought he'd provided. At the life he thought we'd built together. Then I started carrying bags to the door, preparing for the movers who would help me leave behind the fiction I'd been living and step into the truth I'd been hiding. By noon I would be gone. By evening Derek would know everything. And by the end of this week, I would finally be living as the person I actually was rather than the person he needed me to be. The quiet defiance I'd felt in the kitchen when he dismissed my financial independence was about to become something much louder. Not through anger or confrontation, but through the simple, undeniable act of leaving and letting the truth speak for itself. The movers arrived at 11:45, 3 professionals in navy blue uniforms who moved with practiced efficiency through the space. I had made detailed notes about what belonged to me and what belonged to Derek, though in truth nearly everything in the condo was mine. The distinction mattered less for legal reasons and more for psychological ones. I wanted Derek to see clearly, when he returned, exactly what had been mine all along, and what little he had actually contributed to our shared life. "Everything marked with blue tape comes with me," I told the crew chief, a woman in her 40s named Patricia who had the calm, unflappable demeanor of someone who had managed countless complicated moves. "Everything else stays exactly where it is." She nodded, consulting her clipboard. We've handled situations like this before. Discretion and efficiency, that's what we're known for. You'll be in your new place by 4 o'clock, everything unpacked and arranged however you want it. I watched them work, wrapping furniture in protective blankets and loading boxes with careful precision. The leather sectional I had purchased from a boutique furniture store in Capitol Hill, the one Derek loved to sprawl across while watching basketball games, disappeared into the moving truck. The dining table where we had eaten 1,000 meals together, the one I had found at an estate sale and had professionally refinished, followed. The art on the walls, pieces I had collected from local galleries and emerging artists whose work spoke to me, came down and was carefully packaged. Within 2 hours, the condo looked fundamentally different. The space that had felt full and lived in now looked sparse and temporary, like a short-term rental waiting for its next occupant. Derek's belongings remained, of course. His clothes in the closet, his toiletries in the bathroom, his laptop and files in the office nook, his basketball trophies on the bookshelf. But without my contributions, the space revealed itself for what it actually was beneath our relationship's surface. A shell I had filled and he had inhabited, mistaking occupation for ownership. I took photographs of the condo as the movers finished, documenting what I was leaving behind and what I was taking. Not for legal purposes, Catherine had assured me I was completely protected there, but for my own records. Evidence of the moment I stopped hiding. Proof that I had actually done this, that I had chosen truth over comfortable fiction. By 2:30, the moving truck was loaded and ready to depart. I did one final walkthrough of the condo, checking closets and drawers, making sure I had everything that mattered. In the kitchen, I placed the envelope with Derek's name on the counter, positioning it where he would see it immediately when he came home. Next to the envelope, I placed a check for $12,000, the total amount he had transferred to me over 4 years for his supposed half of rent and utilities. Money I had never needed or used, money that had sat in a separate account waiting for a moment exactly like this one. I also left a folder containing documents he would need. A copy of the condo's deed showing my sole ownership. Copies of mortgage statements in my name. The boat loan payoff confirmation showing that I had released him from that financial obligation. Utility bills demonstrating that I had been paying for everything all along. I wanted no ambiguity, no room for him to convince himself that his version of our financial reality had been accurate. The evidence would be clear and undeniable. In the bedroom, I took one last look at the space where Derek and I had slept beside each other for 4 years, where we had talked about our days and our dreams, where we had built an intimacy that I had believed was real. The bed would stay, I had decided. It was too large to move easily, and I had already purchased a new one for the penthouse, something that belonged entirely to my next chapter rather than carrying any remnants of this one. I closed the door behind me and locked it, sliding my key under the door as a final gesture. I had already removed myself from the lease paperwork with the building management, explaining that the unit's owner, which was me, would be transitioning to a different property. They had processed the change without questions, used to the fluid nature of urban housing arrangements. Patricia was waiting by the moving truck, her crew already inside preparing for the drive across town to the penthouse. "We're all set," she said. "Do you want to ride with us or meet us there?" "I'll drive myself," I said. "I need a few minutes alone before I arrive." She understood immediately. "Take your time. We'll get everything unloaded and positioned where you want it. You just focus on taking care of yourself. Days like this are harder than people expect." Her kindness surprised me. I had been so focused on the logistics and the practicalities that I had not allowed myself to fully process the emotional weight of what I was doing. Ending a 4-year relationship, revealing truths that had been hidden for just as long, choosing visibility over the safety of staying small. Patricia's gentle acknowledgement that this was difficult created space for feelings I had been suppressing. I drove across Seattle slowly, taking a route that wound through neighborhoods I had explored when I first moved to the city 8 years ago, fresh out of design school and hungry to build something meaningful. I passed the coffee shop where I had met Derek, where our story had begun with attraction and possibility. I drove by the branding agency where I had worked that uninspiring junior designer job, the place I had been so eager to leave when Derek offered me the supposed security of moving in together. The city looked different to me now, or perhaps I looked different to it. When I had arrived 8 years ago, I had been tentative and uncertain, hoping Seattle would provide opportunities, but not truly believing I had what it took to claim them. The intervening years had transformed me in ways I had not fully recognized until this week. I had built a successful business. I had created financial stability for myself. I had become someone capable and competent and professionally respected. But I had hidden all of that transformation from the person who should have been my closest witness to it. I had performed a version of myself that matched Derek's expectations, rather than reflecting my actual evolution. In protecting his ego, I had denied my own growth. In avoiding conflict, I had created a much larger problem that was only now becoming fully visible. The Penthouse building rose above the Seattle skyline, glass and steel reflecting the afternoon sun. I pulled into the parking garage and took the elevator to the 23rd floor, where my new home waited. The movers were already there, efficiently unpacking boxes and positioning furniture according to the floor plan I had provided them weeks ago. The space was exactly as beautiful as I remembered from my secret weekend visits. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Puget Sound, the water stretching gray and vast toward the Olympic Mountains beyond. The open floor plan created flow between living areas, the kitchen with its marble countertops and professional-grade appliances opening into a dining space that could seat 12. The master bedroom occupied the entire east wing of the unit, with a walk-in closet larger than many Seattle studio apartments, and a bathroom featuring both a soaking tub and a rainfall shower. This was not a starter condo purchased by a hopeful young designer. This was a home chosen by a successful business owner who understood her worth and was willing to invest in space that reflected that worth. This was where I should have been living all along, if I had not been so invested in hiding my success from Derek. Patricia found me standing at the windows looking out at the view. "Your office is set up in the third bedroom like you requested," she said. "Custom desk position to get the natural light. Bookshelves assembled and ready for your files. We hung the art pieces you marked for that room. Everything else is in place too. We'll do a final walkthrough with you before we leave. Make sure it's all exactly how you want it." "Thank you," I said and meant it profoundly. "You've made this so much easier than it could have been." "That's what we do," she said simply. "Help people start their next chapters." By 4:30, the movers had finished. I walked through the penthouse with Patricia, checking each room, confirming that everything was positioned correctly. The transformation from empty space to fully furnished home had happened in a matter of hours, but the emotional journey that had led here had taken 4 years. After Patricia and her crew departed, I stood alone in my penthouse for the first time as its actual resident rather than its secret visitor. The silence was profound and peaceful. No sounds of Derek moving through rooms, no expectation that I should be working quietly in a corner while he occupied the main space. No need to minimize my presence or make myself small so someone else could feel big. I walked to my office, the room I had designed specifically for running my business without compromise. The monitors were already connected, the ergonomic chair adjusted to my specifications, the lighting calibrated for video calls with clients who paid premium rates for my expertise. This was the space where I would continue building what I had started 4 years ago, but now without hiding its existence or downplaying its success. My phone had been silent all afternoon, which I had expected. Derek was in back-to-back meetings with the Vancouver property team, unlikely to check his personal messages until evening. But I knew that silence would end soon, probably within the next hour when he finished work and headed home to the condo. When he opened the door to find most of the furniture gone, and that envelope waiting on the counter. When he read the letter that explained everything he had been blind to for 4 years. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, pulling up files I needed to review for a client presentation tomorrow. Work had always been my anchor, the place where I felt most competent and clear-sighted. Even in the midst of personal upheaval, I had deadlines to meet and clients who depended on me. The professional Elena, the successful business owner, the woman who commanded high fees and delivered exceptional results, she remained constant regardless of what was happening in my relationship life. This realization felt important somehow. Derek had not created my success. He had not enabled my business growth or made my achievements possible. If anything, hiding my accomplishments from him had made everything harder, requiring me to compartmentalize my professional identity from my personal one, to celebrate wins quietly instead of sharing them with my supposed partner. My business had thrived despite Derek, not because of him. My income had grown while he remained oblivious to it. My reputation in the industry had developed while he introduced me at events as someone who did freelance graphic design, as if my work was casual and insignificant rather than sophisticated and lucrative. The thought made me angry in a way I had not allowed myself to feel before. Not angry at Derek specifically, though he certainly bore responsibility for his willful blindness, but angry at myself for enabling that blindness, for participating in my own diminishment, for believing that love required me to hide my capabilities so my partner could feel superior. At 5:15 my phone rang. Derek's name appeared on the screen. I looked at it for a long moment, considering whether to answer. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, to maintain the distance I had created by leaving without confrontation. But another part of me, the part that had been suppressing truths for 4 years, wanted to hear his voice when he first encountered the reality I had been hiding. I answered on the 4th ring. "Hello. What the hell is going on?" His voice was strained, confused, edging toward panic. "Elena, where are you? What happened to the apartment? Why is all the furniture gone?" "You should read the letter I left," I said calmly. "It explains everything. I'm reading it right now and none of this makes sense. You own the condo? You've owned it the whole time? How is that possible? I've been paying rent for 4 years. "You've been paying me rent," I corrected. "I own the condo. I purchased it 6 months before we moved in together. My name is on the deed, on the mortgage, on every piece of paperwork related to that property. You never asked to see any of those documents, so you never knew." The silence on his end stretched for several seconds. I could picture him in the sparse condo, standing in the kitchen reading my letter with growing comprehension and disbelief. "This doesn't make sense," he said finally. "Why would you hide something like that from me? Why would you let me think I was paying rent to a landlord when I was actually paying you?" "Because you needed to believe you were providing for me," I said. "You needed to feel like the successful partner, the one who made our life possible. And I let you believe that because I thought it was kind, because I thought protecting your ego mattered more than being honest." "That's not fair." His voice shifted from confused to defensive. "I never asked you to hide anything from me. If you were successful, if you owned property, you should have just told me. This is on you for lying." The accusation landed exactly as I had expected it would. Derek was incapable of accepting that he had participated in the fiction, that he had never asked questions because he preferred the answers he had invented. It was easier to blame me for hiding the truth than to acknowledge that he had never sought it. "You're right," I said, surprising him with my agreement. "I should have told you. I should have been honest from the beginning about my income and my assets. But Derek, you should have asked. In 4 years of living together, you never once inquired about the specifics of my work or my income. You never wondered how I could afford the things I bought or the trips I took. You never questioned the narrative you created about our financial dynamic because that narrative made you feel good about yourself. So this is my fault?" His voice rose. "You lied to me for 4 years and somehow I'm the bad guy because I didn't interrogate you about your finances? I'm not saying you're the bad guy. I'm saying we both constructed a fiction that served our purposes. You got to feel like the provider and I got to avoid conflict. But that fiction became unsustainable when you told me I couldn't survive without your financial support." That statement revealed how profoundly you misunderstood our relationship and my capabilities. I heard papers rustling on his end, probably the financial documents I had left for him. "This says you paid off my boat loan. $37,000. When did you do that?" "Yesterday. I didn't want any ongoing financial entanglement between us. The loan is closed, the boat is entirely yours, my name has been removed from all the paperwork. I don't understand any of this." His voice sounded smaller now, less defensive and more lost. "Elena, if you were making this kind of money, if you had this level of success, why hide it? Why perform being broke or struggling? It doesn't make sense." This was the question I had been asking myself all week. Why had I hidden my success? What had I gained from making myself invisible? The answers were complex and uncomfortable, requiring me to acknowledge my own fears and insecurities rather than simply blaming Derek for his assumptions. "I hid it because I was afraid," I said, finally articulating what I had been circling around for days. I was afraid that if you knew the truth about my income and my assets, you would feel threatened or diminished. I was afraid you wouldn't be able to handle having a partner who was more financially successful than you. And I was afraid that prioritizing my career and my achievements would make me less lovable, less desirable, less worthy of being chosen. The vulnerability in that admission surprised me even as I spoke it. I had been so focused on Derek's failings, on his inability to see me clearly or ask meaningful questions. But my own failings were just as significant. I had prioritized being chosen over being honest. I had valued relationship harmony over authentic self-presentation. I had believed on some deep level that my success needed to be hidden in order to be loved. "That's ridiculous," Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I would have been proud of you. I would have celebrated your success." "Would you have?" I asked gently. "Or would you have felt competitive? Would you have started comparing your income to mine? Would you have introduced me at work events as your girlfriend who runs a successful design firm? Or would you have found ways to minimize it?" He did not answer immediately, which was answer enough. We both knew that Derek's identity was deeply tied to being professionally successful, to out-earning his peers, to being able to provide for others. My success would have complicated that identity in ways he was not equipped to handle. "The check I left you," I continued. "That's every dollar you transferred to me for rent over the past 4 years. $12,000. I never touched that money. It's been sitting in a separate account. I'm returning it because I don't want you to claim later that you contributed financially to my property or my life. The condo was always mine. You lived there at my discretion, not because you were paying for the right to be there." "This is humiliating," he said quietly. "Everyone is going to know. Your friends, my colleagues. Everyone is going to know that I thought I was supporting you when actually you were carrying everything. They're going to think I'm an idiot." There it was. The core of Derek's concern was not that he had failed to see me or know me. It was not that our relationship had been built on false premises, or that he had missed 4 years of my actual life. His concern was his reputation, his image, how he would be perceived by others when the truth became known. "I haven't told anyone the details of our financial arrangement," I said. "That's between us. But Derek, you need to understand something. The humiliation you're feeling right now is the same humiliation I felt when you told me I couldn't survive without you. When you dismissed my work as bringing in maybe $2,000 on a good month. When you introduced me to your colleagues as your girlfriend who does some freelance work, as if my career was a hobby rather than a legitimate business." "That's not the same thing," he protested. "It's exactly the same thing. The difference is that I absorbed that humiliation privately for 4 years while you're being confronted with it all at once. I understand that's painful. But it's also necessary. You needed to know the truth. We both needed to stop living in the fiction we created." The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, circling through the same territory. Derek oscillated between defensive anger and confused hurt, unable to settle on a response that would make sense of the situation. He asked where I was staying and I told him I had a new place but did not provide the address. He asked if we could meet to talk through everything and I told him I needed space, that everything worth saying had been said in the letter I left. When we finally ended the call, I felt exhausted but clear. The conversation had been difficult but not devastating. Derek's reactions were exactly what I had anticipated, which somehow made them easier to handle. He was processing the collapse of his understanding of our relationship, which would take time. But that was his work to do, not mine. I walked through the penthouse, turning on lights as the autumn evening darkened outside. The space glowed warm and welcoming, every element chosen specifically to reflect who I actually was rather than who someone else needed me to be. This was my next chapter unfolding in real time. This was what it felt like to stop hiding. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucia. "Coffee tomorrow morning? I'm guessing you have updates." I smiled and texted back. "Moved out today. Everything went smoothly. Definitely need coffee and probably something with a lot of sugar. 10 a.m.? I'll bring croissants from that French bakery you love. And champagne. We're celebrating your liberation whether you're ready to or not." The word liberation resonated. That was exactly what this felt like. Not the ending of a relationship, though it was that too. but primarily the liberation from performance, from hiding, from making myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. Liberation from the exhausting work of maintaining a fiction that served no one well. I opened my laptop and pulled up the files for tomorrow's client presentation. A tech startup preparing to launch a new product needed comprehensive branding. Everything from logo design to website architecture to social media presence. It was exactly the kind of complex, high-stakes project that I loved, the kind of work that challenged me creatively and commanded fees that reflected its value. As I reviewed my presentation materials, making small adjustments and refining transitions, I realized something important. This work, this career, this success I had built, none of it had been given to me. I had created it through skill and effort and strategic choices. I had identified opportunities and seized them. I had developed relationships with clients who valued excellence and were willing to pay for it. I had built systems and processes that allowed me to deliver consistently exceptional results. Derek had not enabled any of that. He had simply occupied space in my life while remaining oblivious to what I was actually doing and achieving. His presence had not made me more successful. His absence would not make me less so. The foundation I had been building for the past 4 years was solid and entirely my own. The hidden achievements were about to become visible ones. And the woman who had been performing smallness was stepping fully into the space she had earned. Tomorrow I would meet with my client and deliver a presentation that would likely result in a 6-figure contract. Tomorrow evening I would have coffee with Lucia and celebrate the beginning of my life after hiding. Tomorrow Derek would wake up in the sparse condo and begin processing the reality that he had fundamentally misunderstood the woman he thought he knew. But tonight I would sit in my penthouse, in the home I had purchased with money I had earned, surrounded by furniture and art that reflected my actual taste and success, and simply be present with the truth of who I was. Not who Derek needed me to be. Not who I had performed being for his benefit. Just myself, finally, completely, without apology or diminishment. The hidden foundation had been revealed. The structure built on top of it would need to be dismantled. But beneath it all, I remained solid, capable, and ready for whatever came next. The morning after moving into the penthouse, I woke to sunlight flooding through windows I had forgotten to cover with the blackout shades. The brightness was disorienting at first, so different from the filtered morning light in the condo where neighboring buildings had blocked much of the natural illumination. Here on the 23rd floor, nothing stood between me and the dawn except glass and possibility. I made coffee in the kitchen that still felt unfamiliar, opening cabinets to remember where I had instructed the movers to place things. The ritual of morning preparation grounded me, providing structure to a day that otherwise felt untethered from my previous life. By 8:30, I was showered and dressed for my client presentation. Wearing the navy suit I reserved for important meetings, and the confidence that came from sleeping in a space that reflected my actual success, rather than my performed limitations. Lucia arrived at my door at precisely 10 o'clock as promised, carrying a box of croissants from the French bakery in Capitol Hill and a bottle of champagne that looked expensive even in its paper wrapping. She took one look at the penthouse and let out a low whistle of appreciation. "This is what you've been hiding," she said, walking to the windows to take in the view of Puget Sound stretching toward the mountains. "Elena, this is stunning. How long have you owned this place?" 6 months, I admitted. I've been furnishing it gradually, spending weekends here when I told Derek I was visiting my sister or attending conferences. It was my escape, my secret, the physical manifestation of everything I was hiding from him. Lucia turned from the windows to look at me directly, her expression shifting from admiration to something more serious. "We need to talk about why you felt the need to hide in the first place. Because this pattern, the invisibility, the performing smallness, it didn't start with Derek. You've been doing this your whole life." Her observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Lucia had known me since college, had witnessed the early formation of patterns that had only calcified over time. She had watched me minimize my accomplishments, deflect compliments, and strategically position myself in the background of group dynamics, even when I was the most capable person in the room. We settled on the couch with coffee and croissants, the champagne remaining unopened for the moment. Lucia had that look she got when she was preparing to deliver difficult truths with the same precision she used for medical diagnoses. It was one of the qualities I valued most about our friendship and simultaneously found most challenging to receive. "Tell me about your family," Lucia said, even though she already knew the answer. She was asking me to articulate it myself, to trace the roots of my invisibility back to their source. I took a sip of coffee, gathering thoughts I had spent years avoiding examining too closely. My parents are immigrants from Mexico. They came to Arizona when I was 2 years old with almost nothing except determination and work ethic. My father found construction work, my mother cleaned houses. They scraped together enough money to buy a small home in Phoenix when I was 7. Everything they did was about survival and stability. And you were their only child, Lucia prompted. Yes. I was supposed to be their redemption story. The proof that their sacrifices had meaning. They wanted me to have opportunities they never had, to go to college, to build a professional career, to achieve the American dream they had chased across the border. I paused, recognizing patterns I had never fully acknowledged before. But there was an unspoken rule in our household. Success was acceptable only if it didn't threaten anyone or make them uncomfortable. I was supposed to be accomplished but not boastful, successful but not ambitious, capable but not competitive. Lucia nodded, encouraging me to continue. This was therapy disguised as friendship, the kind of excavation of personal history that required a witness who knew you well enough to ask the right questions. In high school, I won a regional art competition, I continued. My design for a community center mural was selected over 200 other submissions. There was a ceremony, a prize of $5,000, an article in the local paper with my photograph. I was so proud. I thought my parents would be thrilled. But they weren't, Lucia said quietly. My mother was worried about what the neighbors would think, whether they would resent us for drawing attention to ourselves. My father was concerned that the prize money would affect our eligibility for financial aid programs we relied on. And both of them kept emphasizing that I should be grateful and humble, that pride comes before a fall, that successful people who forget where they come from lose their way. I set down my coffee cup, the memories carrying weight I had not anticipated. The message was clear. Achievement was acceptable as long as it remained quiet and didn't disrupt the social equilibrium we existed in. So you learn to hide your successes, Lucia said. To accomplish things without celebration, to achieve without acknowledgement. You internalize the belief that being remarkable meant being problematic. The accuracy of her assessment made my chest tighten. I had spent my entire childhood and adolescence learning to excel quietly, to win without celebrating, to succeed without drawing attention that might make others uncomfortable or resentful. My parents had meant well, operating from their own traumas and fears about visibility in a country where they had spent years trying to avoid notice from authorities and communities that might see them as threats or burdens. But their well-intentioned lessons had taught me that my accomplishments mattered less than other people's comfort with those accomplishments. That being chosen, being accepted, being allowed to remain in spaces of opportunity required me to make myself smaller than I actually was. That love and belonging came with a price, and that price was strategic invisibility. College was supposed to be different, I said. I got a full scholarship to the design program, moved to Seattle, thought I could finally just be myself without worrying about making anyone uncomfortable with my ambitions. But you couldn't break the pattern, Lucia observed. You were still performing humility even when you had every right to claim your space and your success. I thought back to our freshman year, to the design classes where I had been clearly one of the most talented students but had consistently deflected professor praise and downplayed my portfolio quality. I remembered group projects where I had done the majority of the work, but insisted on equal credit distribution, because I did not want to be seen as arrogant or demanding. I recalled the internship opportunities one had almost turned down because I worried about seeming too ambitious or appearing to believe I deserved advantages others did not have access to. You were my roommate that first year, I said to Lucia. You saw how I operated, how I made myself invisible in social situations, even though I was perfectly capable of being interesting and engaging. How I dated guys who were clearly less accomplished than me because I felt safer being the supportive girlfriend than the impressive partner. How I celebrated other people's wins enthusiastically while minimizing my own. Lucia reached across the couch and took my hand. I saw all of that, and I kept hoping you would grow out of it, that you would eventually recognize your worth and stop performing smallness. When you started your business and it began succeeding, I thought maybe you were finally breaking the pattern. But then you met Derek and I watched you slide right back into invisibility. Her words carried no judgment, only concern and the kind of honest observation that true friendship requires. She was right, of course. Meeting Derek had triggered all my historical patterns around success and visibility. He had presented as ambitious and confident, someone who occupied space without apology, someone who believed his achievements merited recognition and celebration. And I had immediately positioned myself as his complement, the quiet supporter who made his success possible without competing for attention or acclaim. I thought I was being strategic, I admitted. Derek's ego seemed fragile in ways he never acknowledged. Anytime someone in his professional circle achieved something significant, he would spend days analyzing how he compared, whether he was falling behind, whether he needed to work harder or network more aggressively. I told myself that hiding my success was an act of relationship preservation, that it prevented competition and conflict. But it wasn't strategic, Lucia said gently. It was self-protective. You were reverting to the childhood pattern you learned from your parents. Hide your accomplishments so others don't feel threatened. Make yourself small so others feel big. Prioritize their comfort over your authenticity. It's the same pattern, just enacted in a romantic relationship instead of a family dynamic. I withdrew my hand and stood, walking to the windows where the morning sun illuminated the water beyond. The view from this height offered perspective on the city below, on the interconnected systems and structures that made urban life function. From up here, individual cars and people were tiny, their daily struggles and triumphs reduced to abstract patterns of movement. It was simultaneously humbling and empowering to recognize how much larger context existed beyond individual experience. When did you realize you were hiding your business success from Derek? Lucia asked from the couch. I thought back through the timeline of my relationship and my business growth, trying to identify the specific moment when strategic omission had become systematic deception. It happened gradually, I said. The first year we lived together, I was still building my client base and my income was genuinely modest. Maybe $50,000 or $60,000 annually, which felt significant to me but wasn't dramatically different from what Derek was making at his commercial real estate firm. I told him I was doing okay with freelance work and he seemed satisfied with that answer without asking for specifics. And then your income grew, Lucia prompted. Exponentially. That connection my college roommate's brother made to the venture capital portfolio companies turned out to be transformative. Suddenly I had access to clients with substantial budgets who valued sophisticated branding and were willing to pay premium rates for expertise. By the second year I was making six figures. By the third year I was approaching $200,000. And through all of that growth, Derek continued to believe I was scraping by with freelance projects that brought in a couple $1,000s monthly. I turned from the window to face Lucia directly. The truth is, I could have corrected his misconceptions at any point. I could have shown him my business bank statements or my tax returns. I could have told him about major client wins or contract renewals. But I didn't because every time I considered it I imagined his reaction. The defensiveness. The need to reassert his position as the more successful partner. The subtle ways he would begin to compete with me or diminish my achievements to maintain his sense of superiority. So you chose invisibility over authenticity, Lucia said. Just like you learned to do as a child. Just like you had practiced throughout college in your early career. The pattern was so deeply ingrained that it felt natural, even necessary, for the relationship to function. Her analysis was accurate and painful. I had not made a conscious decision to hide my success from Derek. I had simply enacted a pattern so familiar that it felt like breathing. Make yourself small. Protect other people's egos. Prioritize harmony over honesty. Deflect attention from your accomplishments. These were not strategies I had developed in response to Derek specifically. They were survival mechanisms I had learned decades earlier and had never adequately unlearned. My mother called last night, I said, changing the subject slightly but not really. Derek must have reached out to my parents after he got home and found the condo empty. She wanted to know what had happened, why I had left so suddenly, whether we could work things out through counseling or conversation. What did you tell her? I told her the truth, that I had been hiding my business success from Derek for years, that he had dismissed my work and my financial contributions, That I had finally decided I couldn't continue in a relationship where I had to perform being less capable than I actually was in order to be loved. I paused, remembering the long silence that had followed my explanation. She didn't understand. She kept asking why I would jeopardize a stable relationship over pride, why I couldn't just be grateful that Derek had been willing to support me, why I was making everything so complicated. Lucia's expression darkened. She was asking you to go back to invisibility, to prioritize Derek's comfort over your own authenticity, to accept his dismissive assessment of your worth because challenging it would disrupt relationship stability. Exactly. And I realized in that conversation that my mother has been performing invisibility her entire life. She's brilliant and capable, but she's spent decades making herself smaller so my father could feel like the head of household. She's managed their finances, made strategic decisions about investments and savings, solved complex problems, but she's always attributed their success to his hard work and leadership. She's been invisible by choice, and she's raised me to believe that was the correct way for women to operate in relationships. The recognition hit me with force. I had not invented my pattern of strategic invisibility. I had inherited it. My mother had modeled it throughout my childhood, demonstrating through her daily choices that female success was acceptable only when properly attributed to male leadership and support. That women could be capable and accomplished as long as they never claimed credit or disrupted the fiction of male superiority and provision. Breaking this pattern was never just about leaving Derek, I said, more to myself than to Lucia. It was about refusing to replicate my mother's choices, about choosing authenticity over acceptance, about prioritizing my own truth over other people's comfort with carefully constructed fictions. Lucia stood and joined me at the window, looking out at the expansive view. Your mother made choices that worked for her within the constraints she faced as an immigrant woman with limited options. You're not judging her choices by making different ones for yourself. You're recognizing that you have opportunities she didn't have, and that honoring those opportunities requires different strategies. Her reframing helped, though the guilt remained. I felt disloyal to my mother, to her sacrifices and her strategies for survival in circumstances far more challenging than anything I had faced. But I also recognized that replicating her patterns would not honor her. It would simply perpetuate limitations that no longer served their original protective purpose. When I purchased this penthouse, I said, gesturing to the space around us, I wasn't just buying real estate. I was claiming physical space that reflected my actual success rather than my performed limitations. I was creating an environment where I could be fully myself without apology or diminishment. I was building something that belonged entirely to me, that no one could take credit for or claim ownership of or attribute to their support and generosity. This space is your declaration of independence, Lucia observed. From Derek, yes, but also from the historical patterns that taught you invisibility was safer than visibility, from the family dynamics that rewarded strategic smallness, from all the cultural messages that told you female success required male validation and permission. I nodded, feeling the weight and the liberation of that recognition. The penthouse was not just a home. It was evidence of possibility, proof that I could build something significant through my own capabilities, demonstration that success did not require me to hide or apologize or make myself small for other people's comfort. I've been thinking about my business, I said, shifting to practical considerations that felt less emotionally fraught. For 4 years, I've operated under an LLC structure that keeps my name relatively hidden from public association with the company. Clients know me obviously, but the broader industry doesn't. I've been invisible by design, which has served certain purposes around client confidentiality and discretion. But now you're reconsidering that invisibility, Lucia guessed. I'm reconsidering everything. The LLC structure made sense when I was building the business and wanted to protect my privacy, but it also allowed me to hide my success from Derek and anyone else who might have complicated feelings about my achievements. I'm starting to wonder whether maintaining that structure perpetuates the invisibility pattern or whether it's a legitimate business strategy independent of my personal psychology. Lucia considered this carefully before responding. I think the answer depends on your motivation. If you're staying hidden because you're afraid of how people will react to your success, that's perpetuating the old pattern. If you're maintaining privacy because it serves your business objectives and protects your clients, That's strategic. The question is whether you can honestly distinguish between those two motivations. Her challenge was fair and difficult. How much of my business structure reflected genuine strategic thinking, and how much reflected deeply ingrained patterns around visibility and self-protection? The answer was probably some complicated combination of both, which meant I needed to examine my choices more carefully going forward. There's a speaking opportunity I've been avoiding, I admitted. A design conference in Portland next month. The organizers reached out 6 weeks ago asking if I would deliver a keynote about building a successful independent practice in the branding space. It's a significant platform, probably 500 people in attendance, with coverage in industry publications. I told them I needed to think about it and then never responded. Why did you avoid it? Because accepting would make me visible in ways I've carefully avoided. My name would be published in conference materials. My photograph would appear on promotional content. Industry colleagues and potential clients would know who I was and what I had built. It felt exposing and risky, and like it might create complications in my personal life. I paused. Except I don't have those personal life complications anymore. Derek is no longer a factor in my decision-making. The only thing stopping me from accepting that speaking opportunity is my own historical pattern around visibility. Lucia smiled, the first genuine smile of our conversation. So accept it. Send them an email today confirming your participation. Start practicing visibility intentionally instead of defaulting to invisibility reflexively. You have something valuable to share with other designers and entrepreneurs. Hiding that knowledge because you're uncomfortable with attention serves no one, least of all yourself. Her encouragement felt both terrifying and necessary. I had spent my entire life believing that visibility was dangerous, that claiming space and attention would result in rejection or resentment or some form of social punishment. But what if that belief was simply a legacy of old fears that no longer reflected current reality? What if visibility, rather than threatening my relationships and opportunities, actually expanded them? I'll email them this afternoon, I said, committing before I could reconsider. I'll accept the speaking opportunity and start preparing content that shares what I've learned about building a business without apology. Good, Lucia said firmly. And while you're at it, update your business website to include your photograph and your full name prominently. Stop hiding behind corporate anonymity when you've built something worth claiming publicly. Let people know who you are and what you're capable of. The suggestions felt like they were coming too fast, pushing me toward changes I was not entirely ready for. But I also recognized that readiness was a fiction, an excuse for delay. I would never feel completely ready to abandon invisibility patterns that had protected me for decades. I could only make the choice to act differently despite discomfort, to practice visibility until it became familiar rather than frightening. We opened the champagne then, the cork releasing with a satisfying pop that echoed through the penthouse. Lucia poured 2 glasses and raised hers in a toast. To the end of invisibility, to claiming your space without apology, to building a life that reflects your actual capabilities, rather than your performed limitations. To Elena Rodriguez, successful business owner and my brilliant friend who is finally, after 32 years, allowing herself to be seen. I clinked my glass against hers, the sound sharp and clear. To being seen, I echoed, and took a long drink of champagne that tasted like celebration and liberation and the complicated work of unlearning patterns that no longer served their original protective purpose. After Lucia left, promising to check in daily as I navigated this transition period, I sat at my new desk in my office and opened my laptop. The email to the Portland conference organizers wrote itself quickly, my acceptance enthusiastic and my proposed keynote topic clear. Building a brand while building yourself. Lessons in visibility and authenticity for independent designers. The irony of the title was not lost on me, given that I had spent 4 years hiding my business success from my romantic partner. But perhaps that irony made me the perfect person to address the topic, someone who understood both the temptation of invisibility and the cost it exacted. I sent the email before I could reconsider, then immediately pulled up my business website. The current design was clean and professional but deliberately impersonal. The About page described my firm's approach and philosophy without including my photograph or much biographical information. Clients who found me through referrals already knew who I was, so the anonymity had not hindered business development. but it had allowed me to maintain separation between my public professional identity and my private personal life, which had enabled hiding my success from Derek. I spent 2 hours redesigning the About page, adding a professional headshot I had taken 6 months ago, including detailed information about my background and approach, making myself visible in ways the previous design had carefully avoided. When I finished, the website told a clear story about who I was and what I had built, without apology or strategic omission. It felt vulnerable and necessary, like stepping out from behind a curtain I had been hiding behind for far too long. By evening, I was exhausted from the emotional work of excavating historical patterns and committing to new ones. But I also felt lighter, as if acknowledging the sources of my invisibility had somehow reduced their power over my present choices. I understood now that my relationship with Derek had not created my pattern of hiding success. It had simply provided a convenient context for enacting patterns I had learned decades earlier from family and culture, and the complicated dynamics of being a first-generation American woman, trying to navigate between two worlds with different expectations about female achievement and visibility. Breaking those patterns required more than leaving Derek or moving into a penthouse or accepting a speaking opportunity. It required examining the deep beliefs I held about what made me worthy of love and belonging, about whether success threatened relationships or enhanced them, about what I owed to the people who had raised me and the communities I came from. These were questions without simple answers, tensions that would likely persist throughout my life in various forms. But I was beginning to understand that the goal was not to resolve these tensions completely. The goal was to make conscious choices about when invisibility served legitimate purposes, and when it simply perpetuated old fears. To distinguish between strategic privacy and self-protective hiding. To claim space and visibility when doing so advanced my genuine goals rather than defaulting to smallness because it felt familiar and safe. The historical pattern of invisibility had shaped my life in profound ways, some protective and some limiting. Understanding that pattern did not erase it, but it created space for different choices going forward. Choices that prioritized authenticity over acceptance, that valued visibility over comfort, that recognized my worth was not contingent on other people's ability to handle my success without feeling threatened. I was 32 years old. I had spent 3 decades learning to hide. Perhaps the next 3 decades could be about learning to be seen. The week following my departure from the condo unfolded with a strange combination of relief and reckoning. I had anticipated feeling liberated, and I did, but I had not fully prepared for the analytical work that would follow. Once I had created physical and emotional distance from Derek, I found myself compelled to examine the actual mechanics of our relationship with the kind of forensic detail I usually reserved for client projects requiring crisis management. On Thursday morning, 3 days after moving into the penthouse, I sat at my desk with my laptop open and began creating a comprehensive financial analysis of the past 4 years. This was not about vindication or proving Derek wrong, though those motivations existed somewhere beneath the surface. This was about understanding with precision and clarity exactly how imbalanced our partnership had been, about documenting the gap between perception and reality, so completely that no ambiguity could remain. I started with housing costs, the most substantial expense in any Seattle budget. The condo I had purchased 4 years ago had required a down payment of $60,000, money I had saved during my final year at the branding agency, and my first 6 months of serious freelance work. The mortgage payment was $2,800 monthly, plus another $400 for property taxes and homeowners association fees. Over 4 years, I had paid $158,400 in housing costs. Derek had transferred me $600 monthly for what he believed was his half of rent to a landlord. Over 4 years, those transfers totaled $28,800. I had deposited every payment into a separate savings account and returned the full amount to him when I moved out, which meant his net contribution to our housing over 4 years had been precisely $0. The numbers were stark when laid out in spreadsheet columns. I had invested $218,400 in purchasing and maintaining our housing. Derek had invested nothing, despite believing he was covering half the rent and making our life together financially possible. I moved next to utilities and household expenses. Internet, electricity, water, garbage collection, all of it had been automatically deducted from my business account for the entire duration of our cohabitation. I pulled up 4 years of bank statements and calculated the total. $18,600. Derek had occasionally offered to pay specific bills, but I had always deflected, telling him I had already handled it or that we could settle up later. We never did settle up, and he never followed through on verifying what bills actually cost or who was paying them. Furniture and household items represented another category of substantial expense that Derek had no awareness of. The leather sectional sofa he loved and frequently mentioned as evidence of our good taste had cost $6,500 from a boutique furniture store in Capitol Hill. The dining table where we had shared countless meals was a mid-century modern piece I had found at an estate sale and paid $3,000 to have professionally refinished. The bedroom set, the office furniture, the kitchen appliances, the art on the walls, all of it purchased with my money and selected according to my aesthetic preferences, though Derek had certainly offered opinions and acted as though his input had been determinative in our choices. I tallied the furniture and household expenses carefully, working through credit card statements and receipts I had maintained in my financial files. $42,000 over 4 years for furniture, appliances, kitchenware, linens, decorative items, and the thousands of small purchases that transform an empty condo into a furnished home. Derek's contribution to this category had been approximately $800, spent on a television he had insisted we needed for watching basketball games and a set of weights for home workouts he had used perhaps a dozen times before abandoning them in favor of his gym membership. The vehicle situation was particularly revealing when examined with precision. Derek drove a BMW 3 Series that he had purchased 2 years into our relationship, financed through a loan with a high interest rate that reflected his mediocre credit score and substantial existing debt from student loans and credit cards he had accumulated during graduate school. The monthly payment was $675, which he had managed to cover consistently for the first year despite complaining frequently about how it strained his budget. In the second year of the loan, Derek's commercial real estate firm had gone through restructuring that resulted in reduced commissions and a 30% salary cut. He had been devastated, his identity closely tied to his income level and professional trajectory. The BMW payment had become genuinely difficult for him to manage, and I had watched him stress over it for several months before I had quietly intervened. I had called the lender directly, verified that I could pay off the loan in full, and transferred $28,300 to close out the debt. Then I had called Derek and told him the lender had made an error in his favor, that somehow his account had been credited and the loan was showing as paid in full. He should check his statements to verify, I had suggested, knowing he would not actually do so because he wanted to believe in the fiction of unexpected good fortune. He had accepted my explanation with relief and gratitude, never questioning how a financial institution could make such a substantial error, never investigating the details of the supposed clerical mistake. He had simply celebrated his good luck and continued driving the BMW as though it represented his success and smart financial management, completely unaware that I had purchased his freedom from that debt. Beyond the major expense categories, there were hundreds of smaller financial contributions that had accumulated into substantial sums over 4 years. I had paid for groceries at least 70% of the time, despite Derek's occasional offers to cover the bill. I calculated an average of $400 monthly on food, which over 4 years represented $19,200, of which Derek had probably contributed $6,000 at most. I had funded most of our dining out, entertainment, and travel expenses. When we went to restaurants, I often paid the bill. When we took weekend trips to the San Juan Islands or down to Portland, I typically covered the hotel and most meals. When we attended concerts or sporting events, I usually purchased the tickets. Derek would occasionally insist on paying for something, but his contributions were sporadic and small relative to the overall spending pattern. I estimated I had covered approximately 80% of our discretionary spending over 4 years, which represented another $25,000 approximately. Then there were the direct financial supports I had provided to Derek personally, beyond our shared household expenses. The most significant was the loan I had given him for camera equipment, when he had decided he needed professional-grade gear to photograph architectural projects for his portfolio. $15,000, transferred to his account with a verbal agreement that he would repay me when his commission structure improved. That had been 3.5 years ago. He had never mentioned repayment, and I had never requested it, letting the debt disappear into the category of things we did not discuss. I had also funded his membership in the American Institute of Architects, an annual expense of $325 that Derek considered essential for his professional credibility. For 3 years I had paid this membership fee, telling him it was a gift to support his career development. $975 total, a small amount individually but symbolically significant as evidence of how I had subsidized his professional identity, while he remained oblivious to my support. There were dozens of other smaller expenditures that I had covered without acknowledgement or expectation of repayment. The tailored suits he wore to client meetings, which I had purchased as birthday or holiday gifts, but which he treated as evidence of his professional success. The laptop he used for work presentations, which I had bought him 2 years ago when his old one died, telling him I had gotten a substantial discount through a client connection. The subscription services he used daily, from streaming platforms to cloud storage to professional software, most of which were billed to my credit cards and had been for years. When I finished my financial analysis, the spreadsheet told an irrefutable story. Over 4 years of cohabitation, I had invested approximately $347,000 in our shared life and Derek's personal expenses. Derek had invested approximately $35,000, most of which I had returned to him when I moved out. The actual financial imbalance was not 2-to-1 or even 3-to-1. It was approximately 10-to-1, with me contributing roughly 90% of the real costs of our life together while Derek contributed 10% and believed he was carrying the majority of our financial burden. The numbers were both validating and disturbing. Validating because they confirmed with precision what I had known intuitively, that Derek's narrative about supporting me financially was completely divorced from reality. Disturbing because they revealed the extent of my own complicity in maintaining that false narrative, the enormous effort I had invested in hiding my contributions and enabling his misconceptions. But the financial imbalance was only one dimension of the partnership inequity. There were other forms of labor and contribution that did not appear in bank statements but were equally significant in maintaining the infrastructure of our relationship and household. I opened a new document and began cataloging the invisible work I had performed over 4 years, the emotional and practical labor that had kept our life functioning smoothly while remaining largely unacknowledged by Derek. This accounting was necessarily more subjective than the financial analysis, but it was no less important for understanding how profoundly imbalanced our partnership had been. Household management represented an enormous category of invisible work that I had handled almost entirely alone. I had been the one who noticed when we were running low on essential supplies and added items to shopping lists. I had been the one who researched and scheduled service appointments for everything from internet installation to appliance repairs to pest control. I had been the one who tracked important dates and deadlines, from lease renewal periods to insurance payment schedules to vehicle registration requirements. Derek had occupied our shared space without apparently noticing or questioning how that space remained functional and well-maintained. He had never asked who was scheduling the quarterly cleaning service that kept the condo presentable. He had never wondered who was managing the rotation of seasonal items or organizing the storage closet or ensuring we had working light bulbs and sufficient household supplies. He had simply assumed these things happened automatically, or perhaps more accurately, he had never thought about them at all because they were reliably handled without requiring his attention or effort. Social and relational labor represented another enormous category of invisible contribution. I had been the one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries for Derek's family members, who purchased appropriate gifts, who sent cards and made phone calls to maintain those relationships. I had been the one who organized our social calendar, coordinating with friends for dinners and weekend activities, sending invitations and managing RSVPs. I had been the one who noticed when relationships needed attention and reached out to people we had not seen recently. Derek had benefited from an active social life and maintained family relationships without apparently recognizing the work required to sustain those connections. He showed up to birthday dinners I had arranged, brought gifts I had purchased and wrapped, enjoyed friendships I had actively maintained through regular contact and planning. When his colleagues had praised him for being so thoughtful about sending holiday cards, he had accepted the compliment without mentioning that I had written all the cards, addressed all the envelopes, and managed the entire mailing process. Emotional labor represented perhaps the most significant and least visible category of my contribution to our relationship. I had been the one who tracked Derek's moods and emotional states, who noticed when he was stressed about work or anxious about professional performance. I had been the one who provided reassurance during his periods of self-doubt, who listened to his concerns and frustrations for hours, who helped him process difficult situations and make decisions about career challenges. This emotional support had been substantial and consistent throughout our relationship. Derek had used me as his primary emotional processing resource, coming home from work and downloading his day in extensive detail, seeking validation and encouragement, wanting affirmation that his frustrations were justified and his ambitions were reasonable. I had provided that support generously, believing it was part of partnership, part of what people do for each other in committed relationships. But the support had been almost entirely unidirectional. When I had experienced professional challenges or needed to process difficult client situations, Derek had offered superficial encouragement, but rarely engaged with the actual substance of my concerns. He would listen for a few minutes before redirecting the conversation back to his own experiences, or he would offer generic advice that suggested he had not really understood the situation I was describing. His capacity for emotional presence and support extended only as far as his own needs and interests. I had accommodated this imbalance by processing most of my emotional experiences independently, or with friends like Lucia who had the capacity and interest to actually engage with my internal life. I had learned not to expect deep emotional support from Derek, which had seemed like a reasonable adaptation at the time. Many partnerships involved people with different strengths and capacities. Derek was not particularly emotionally available or insightful, but he had other qualities I valued, or so I had told myself. Looking at the pattern now with clarity and distance, I recognized it as another manifestation of the fundamental imbalance in our relationship. Derek had assumed his needs, concerns, and emotional experiences were the primary content of our shared life. He had assumed my role was to provide support, encouragement, and validation for his journey without requiring equivalent attention to my own. And I had enabled that assumption by making my needs small and my emotional life largely invisible to him. Professional support represented another category where the imbalance was striking. I had attended countless work events with Derek over 4 years, standing beside him at networking functions and client dinners, making conversation with his colleagues and their partners, presenting as the supportive girlfriend who enhanced his professional image. I had edited his presentations and proposals, offered feedback on his project pitches, helped him prepare for important meetings by running through potential questions and responses. This professional support had been substantial and valuable. Derek's colleagues had occasionally commented to him about how lucky he was to have such a supportive partner, how helpful I must be to his career success. He had accepted these observations as accurate without apparently recognizing the irony. I was indeed supporting his career success in concrete and time-consuming ways, while he remained completely uninformed about my own professional work and achievements. The reciprocal support had been essentially non-existent. Derek had attended perhaps 3 of my client events over 4 years, and at those he had been visibly bored and eager to leave. He had never offered to review my design work or proposals, never expressed interest in my creative process or strategic thinking, never asked substantive questions about my business challenges or opportunities. His relationship to my professional life had been one of benign neglect, acknowledging its existence while treating it as peripheral to the real action of his own career. As I documented these various categories of imbalance, a pattern became increasingly clear. Derek had operated throughout our relationship as though he were the protagonist of our shared story, and I were a supporting character whose function was to enable his narrative. His career, his concerns, his social life, his emotional needs, his professional development, all of these were treated as primary and important. Mine were treated as secondary at best, background noise that could be safely ignored without significant consequence. And I had accepted this positioning for 4 years. I had made myself into the supporting character Derek needed me to be, believing that this was what partnership required, that someone needed to occupy the background so the other person could occupy the foreground. I had not recognized or had not allowed myself to recognize that this arrangement was neither inevitable nor healthy, that partnerships could be structured differently, with both people treating each other as protagonists of equally important stories, rather than one person accepting a supporting role to enable the other's primacy. The financial analysis showed I had contributed approximately 90% of the material resources that made our life together possible. The invisible labor analysis suggested the imbalance in non-financial contributions was similarly dramatic, with me providing the vast majority of household management, social coordination, emotional support, and professional assistance. Across every meaningful dimension of partnership, I had been giving far more than I received while Derek had been taking far more than he acknowledged or appreciated. This imbalance had been sustainable only because I had hidden it, both from Derek and to some extent from myself. I had not tracked my financial contributions or calculated the dollar value of the life I was funding. I had not cataloged my invisible labor or recognized how exhausting it was to manage our entire shared existence, while maintaining the fiction that Derek was an equal partner. I had simply kept giving, kept supporting, kept enabling because stopping would have required confronting how inequitable our arrangement actually was. The confrontation was happening now, on Thursday afternoon in my penthouse office, alone with spreadsheets and documents that told an undeniable story. The partnership had been profoundly imbalanced. I had been exploited, though perhaps not intentionally. Derek had genuinely believed his version of our financial and relational reality, had actually thought he was supporting me and carrying the weight of our life together. His exploitation had been enabled by his incuriosity and his investment in a narrative that positioned him as successful provider rather than dependent recipient. But I had enabled that exploitation through my strategic invisibility, through my choice to hide my contributions rather than making them visible and requiring acknowledgement. I had prioritized Derek's comfort and ego over accuracy and equity. I had valued relationship harmony over honest accounting of who was actually doing the work and providing the resources that made our life together possible. The recognition of my own complicity did not excuse Derek's behavior or diminish the validity of my anger about his dismissive comments. But it did complicate the story I might have told myself about being simply a victim of his selfishness or obliviousness. I had not been passive in creating this imbalance. I had been an active architect of it, making deliberate choices over 4 years to hide my success and my contributions, to perform limitation and need, to enable Derek's false beliefs about our partnership dynamics. Understanding this complex web of mutual participation in an unhealthy pattern was both clarifying and uncomfortable. It meant I could not simply blame Derek for failing to see me accurately. I had to acknowledge my role in remaining invisible, in choosing obscurity over honesty, in valuing his comfort more than my own integrity and authenticity. The question now was what to do with this understanding. The financial documentation and the invisible labor analysis existed as private knowledge, information I had compiled for my own clarity and processing. I had not sent any of this to Derek. I had not published it or shared it with friends beyond Lucia, who already knew most of these details from years of observation and conversation. Part of me wanted to send Derek the entire analysis, to force him to confront with precision exactly how wrong he had been about our partnership. To make him understand that every comfortable assumption he had made about carrying our financial weight and supporting my limited career had been completely inverted from reality. To deliver the evidence in a format so clear and comprehensive that he could not dismiss it or explain it away or maintain any fragment of his previous understanding. But another part of me recognized that sending this analysis would serve primarily vindictive purposes rather than constructive ones. Derek already knew the basic truth. He had read my departure letter. He had seen the financial documents I had left for him. He understood now that I owned the condo, that my business was successful, that I had been paying for our life together while he credited himself with that provision. Sending him detailed spreadsheets documenting the specific dollar amounts and categories of imbalance would not teach him anything new. It would simply humiliate him more thoroughly. The question of what Derek deserved was less important than the question of what I needed. And what I needed was not revenge or even full acknowledgement from him of how profoundly he had misunderstood our relationship. What I needed was to internalize these patterns myself, to understand them so completely that I would never recreate them in future relationships. To recognize my tendency toward invisible overcontribution and strategic self-diminishment. To notice when I was beginning to enable someone's false narrative about my capabilities or worth. To choose visibility and equity even when obscurity and imbalance felt more comfortable or familiar. I saved the financial analysis and the invisible labor documentation in a secure folder on my laptop. These documents were for me, Evidence of patterns I needed to remember and learn from. Proof that the partnership had been as inequitable as it had felt during those moments when I allowed myself to notice the imbalance beneath our surface harmony. Then I closed my laptop and walked to the penthouse windows, looking out at Seattle in the late afternoon light. The city below was full of people navigating their own relationships and partnerships, their own negotiations about equity and contribution, their own struggles with visibility and recognition. Some of them were probably maintaining imbalances similar to what I had maintained with Derek, giving far more than they received and calling it love. Some were probably receiving far more than they gave and calling it deserved. Most were probably somewhere in the messy middle, trying to balance competing needs and capacities within the constraints of human imperfection. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.